Deadlock has a lot of settings, both inside and outside of this gigantic settings menu, and as a new player it can be hard to understand which settings you should turn on and off to have the best player experience. So in this video I want to explain what every single setting in Deadlock does and what my recommendations are for you to set up your game properly. This video will also include some of the settings not featured here in the settings window, such as in the item shop or in the launch options on Steam. However, we will not be discussing controller options today. Honestly, Deadlock just isn't really optimized for controller anyways, and I would highly recommend playing this game with a keyboard and mouse. Now, before we begin discussing the settings in each of the categories here, I would just like to point out that there is a search bar on the top left of the settings menu now, and so if you want to look up a specific setting, for example, voice chat, then you can do that here, and it'll automatically find you the setting that you need, which is great for just changing one setting in a pinch. There will also be timestamps in the description if you want to skip around to various categories. To start things off, let's discuss the video settings. In the display category here, you can change your resolution and aspect ratio, and I would recommend setting it to either borderless window for the convenience of easily toggling to other windows, or full screen for the best performance possible. When you first start playing Deadlock, your performance settings will probably just have one button here for the rendering quality. To have finer control over your settings, you'll want to select advanced settings, and then you have a bunch of options here. The settings from screen space, AO through texture quality are all pretty self-explanatory, and when you hover over them, it'll actually tell you their performance impact, and you'll want to adjust these to make sure you have the best and most consistent FPS possible. Trying to play Deadlock with low FPS or stuttering issues is like trying to do anything in real life with a migraine. It's just not very fun. And to check your FPS, you can go down to HUD telemetry and set show frame time and FPS to always, and then at the top right you'll be able to see your FPS. This is also where you can find your ping and other related metrics. Upscaling technology is where things get confusing because there are 4 settings here and the game doesn't explain what they do. NVIDIA DLSS is most likely the one you'll want to use because most people who play Deadlock have an NVIDIA graphics card, and this is the best option, especially for the later models of NVIDIA card. However, if you are using a super old GPU, you may want to consider Stretch. Stretch has the poorest picture quality, but it is also the cheapest option. Otherwise, FSR2 is the best option for non-NVIDIA cards, as it'll give you the best picture quality, but if you want to compromise between Stretch's performance and FSR2's picture quality, then there is FSR. The scaling mode will determine how fast your game is able to render. Higher scaling values will allow your game to render faster and get more FPS, but it'll lower your native resolution, making the picture quality worse. If you're using NVIDIA DLSS, then you can choose between the CNN and Transformer models. Transformer will have higher picture quality, but it's also more expensive. And if you're using FSR2, then you can adjust the sharpness with this slider here. The 2 bloom toggles, area lights, and depth of field are all effects that have minimal impact on your performance, but they do change how your game looks. And if you want to maximize visual clarity, then you should turn all of them off, but most people don't need to do this. They make your game look pretty and they don't really hurt to have on. VSync, however, should always be turned off. It is a terrible setting to have enabled in any competitive multiplayer game. It eliminates screen tearing artifacts, which is helpful, I suppose. Screen tearing is when you see some lines across your screen as you look around, and it can be annoying, but most PCs don't have a problem with this these days. But this comes at the cost of increasing your input latency, which is basically the time between when you click on one of your inputs, like your mouse, and then you actually see the effect on the screen. So that increase in input latency is just not good at all. Do not have VSync on. The final setting in the performance category is the in-game maximum FPS, which can go really high, but realistically it should only be about where your monitor's refresh rate is. And if you don't know how to find that, you can come up here to the display settings and look at the hertz rate under resolution. So I have a 144 hertz monitor here, which means my refresh rate should be about 144. You can, however, add a little bit of a buffer to improve overall consistency in case of frame drops, but you don't want to go too high because you won't be able to see the difference. Your monitor can only render frames so fast. So don't set this to something ludicrous like 300 or 500 unless your refresh rate happens to be that high. There are a couple more options here that can be helpful. First of all, if you're running into stability issues, then you you may want to consider changing your rendering engine from DirectX 11 to Vulkan. Most players, however, will still just want to have DirectX 11 as it is the standard rendering engine. Also, if you have fancy NVIDIA hardware, then you can enable both NVIDIA Reflex and G-Sync to improve your latency. And if you have any visual impairments where flashing makes you really uncomfortable, then you can reduce flashing effects with this toggle here. Next up we have the audio section, and most of this is pretty self-explanatory. You don't need me to tell you how to change the volume, that's just a bit silly. However, there are some settings down here in the voice category that need a little bit of attention. First of all, I would recommend turning on Streamlined Mic just to clear up any issues with loading your mic the first time you speak in a match. And also, you should never have open mic on. This is a terrible idea because you don't want random people on the internet to hear every little thing that's going on in the background of your real life. However, you'll notice that there are no push-to-talk options here, and that's because they've moved them from the audio section to the Keybinds section. So if I click on Keybinds and then the audio subcategory, this is where you'll be able to see push-to-talk. So this middle one here, voice chat team, is the one that you'll want to set up to communicate with your team effectively. And I do recommend using voice chat in Deadlock because it's a big part of coordinating to win the game, and you can't really rank up if you're not calming with your team. Let's talk about the game settings now, and there are a lot of Deadlock specific settings here that you'll want to pay attention to. First, we do have the reticle settings, and a lot of these are very self-explanatory, but if you wanted to, for some reason, use my reticle, then here's the settings for that, I guess. There are two settings here that are important though. The first one is themed hero reticles, which you'll want to turn off because a lot of heroes, especially the new heroes added in the last 2 updates, have really bad reticles for aiming. If I turn this on and then swap to Celeste, I mean, what the heck even is this? This is not a competitively viable reticle, so just turn this off, especially if you find them to be annoying. And also I would recommend turning reticle motion off. If this is on, your reticle will be able to move around in accordance with the spread and recoil of your gun, and it's just harder to aim with than a static reticle in my opinion. Next we have the camera subcategory with the usual sensitivity settings, as well as the option to invert your mouse or toggle zoom. There is one important setting here though, and that is camera FOV, which should be all the way maxed at 90. If you turn it down to 75, you will have a more vintage Deadlock look, as this used to be the old FOV, but having it at 90 just lets you see more of what's around you, and that's better for everybody. We'll tackle this shop setting a little bit later when we discuss the item store. After that we have these 2 skill rating settings, both of which I would turn on. The first one, rating change notifications, will let you know when you rank up or unfortunately rank down. It does appear to be bugged right now, but I'm sure they'll fix that in the future, and it's just a good thing to have on. The second option allows you to see the rank of the match that you're in on the post-match scoreboard. So if you've ever wondered how streamers are able to know that they are in an Eternus match, this is how. And if you're a sweaty tryhard, then you can turn on the extra competitive setting in the matchmaking section here, which will queue you with other people who have this setting on and are looking for a higher level of coordination, communication, and competitiveness. Most casual players will want this off, and also this might increase your queue times if you have it on. These last few settings aren't really that important, except for the dev command console here, which you should have on if you plan on doing the command-related settings later in the video. Real quick before moving on, I would just like to say that if you found this video to be helpful so far and you're enjoying the content, then of course make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on future guides just like this one. Anyways, back to the video. And while we're down here, we can briefly discuss the language settings. You can change the language of your game to any of these supported languages, and you can also force English hero names and item names if you wish. If you speak 2 languages, you may want to consider turning on alternate hero build language to a second language of your choosing. For example, if you speak Spanish, like I barely do, then you can add Spanish as an alternate language here, and then when you go to look up builds for a character, you'll be able to see public builds that are written in English and in Spanish, just like this. Next, let's discuss some item shop settings. There's one setting here in the game category of the settings menu, but there are also some settings within the item shop itself that you need to pay attention to. The first setting here allows you to have an active item slot pop up when you're buying an item like Cultist Sacrifice, and I absolutely recommend turning this on. What it does is prompt you to assign the active item item to whichever slot you want it to be in when you're buying the item, just like this. So I can click on one of these 4 slots, or I can just press the corresponding slot keybind, like C, and then it'll go to slot 3, which is bound to C. If this setting is off, then when I go to buy Cultist Sacrifice, it'll just put it in the first available item slot, which isn't ideal, because in Deadlock, you want to bind your active items to the same slot every single time if you can help it, so you can build up the muscle memory of using that active item. Now, if you make a mistake and put an active item in the wrong slot, then you can still just click and drag on the item to move it to the correct slot, just like this, which is kind of an unintuitive trick, and much to my chagrin, I have to admit that it took me a couple hundred hours before I realized that this was possible. So, yeah, you can just click and drag this, and it is very helpful. There are 2 more settings related to the item shop, and they have to do with the quick buy menu. So if I come up here to the top left and click on quick buy, you can see these 2 additional options here. The one on the bottom I absolutely recommend turning on. It allows you to auto buy items when within range of the shop. Instead of prompting you to buy the item that's in your queue, it'll just automatically buy the item with no fuss. The first option, however, is terrible to have on, because it auto-queues your selected build at game's start. This might seem convenient, but most builds aren't constructed with this in mind, and if you auto-queue your entire build, then it makes it very hard to buy any situational items or items in the optional categories, especially if this is on in tandem with the second setting here, because it'll auto-buy your items, and then you'll have to sell whatever item you want in order to then go and buy the situational item. It adds a lot of hassle, and it also makes it harder to learn the item store because you don't interact with the items nearly as much. When you have to manually click on the items, you become more intimately familiar with what they do and when you would want to buy them. Auto queue the selected build just removes that entirely, so do not have this first setting on, but the second setting is very helpful. Let's move on now to a very busy section, the keybinds. There is a lot going on here. First of all, you can choose to have hero-specific keybinds if you want, and I do generally recommend doing this just to fine-tailor your experience. When you first open this menu, then it'll automatically select the character that you're playing, which is 7 in my case, but if you want to adjust the default keybinds for anybody, then you can just click right here on the default character. Your ability keybinds are pretty self-explanatory, but there are 2 cancel binds here, which could be a little bit confusing. This first one here allows you to cancel your ability with a dedicated keybind, which is space in my case. So if I have a channeled ability like Stormcloud, I can cancel it by pressing space. And then this second toggle allows you to cancel abilities with the ability keys. So if I activate Stormcloud by pressing E, I can press E again to cancel the Stormcloud. The dedicated keybind is hero specific, so if I just set this to the up arrow for 7, it will not be the up arrow for Rem. But this toggle is not hero specific, so if I turn off cancel abilities with ability key and then go to Rem, it is also off for Rem. This is really confusing and probably a bug, and I would not be surprised if they fix this in the future, but in the meantime, if you want this to be different for different characters, then you'll have to come in here manually each time you switch to a different hero. Now let's discuss the different cast modes. There are some abilities in this game that have different cast modes. You have Confirm Cast, Quick Cast, and Instant Cast. For example, Static Charge, if I set it to the ability default, will be on Confirm Cast. So if I press the button, I enter this state where I am basically holding the ability ready to put it on someone, and then I can left click to put it on Abrams, or just cancel the ability like this and not put it on anybody. However, this is a lot of button presses, and some people don't like that. So instead, you can set it to Instant Cast, and now it'll just instantly put it on Abrams, or whoever I'm looking at, the second that I use the ability. Quick Cast is the hybrid between these two, so if I set Static Charge to Quick Cast and then hold down the Static Charge, I enter this state where I can choose to not use the ability by looking away, or by letting the ability go, I can put it on Abrams. And so it's a nice in-between, where I can still instantly put it on somebody with one button, but I can also hold the ability to make sure that I put it on the person I want to put it on. You can set the casting mode for all hero abilities globally by using this option at the very top. Some abilities have alt casts. For example, Viscus can put the cube on an ally by using the ability normally, or he can alt cast and put himself in the cube, and you can change how this works too. The alternate cast mode here has a few different variations. I use press and hold, where I just hold down the ability to alt cast it, and you can fine-tune the delay here with this slider. You can also set it to double tap, where you just press the button twice in quick succession like a double click to alt cast it, and you can again adjust the delay here, or you can have a dedicated alt cast button, and this works differently depending on whether the ability is instant cast or confirm cast. If it's instant cast, you need to hold down the alt cast button and then press the ability to alt cast it, but if it's confirm cast, then you press the ability and then press the alt cast button to cast it on yourself. For both the casting mode and the alternate cast mode, there really is no right answer, it just depends on your personal preference, but I just wanted to explain how all of this works. You can also adjust the cast mode for items with this separate option here, as well as their binds. The rest of these keybinds don't really need an explanation, but I do want to touch on a couple of unique quirks before we move on to the next section. First of all, you can actually have a separate bind for jump and zip line. They are the same by default, but you can change that if you want. There are also some miscellaneous keybinds here that are very interesting. First of all, you can rebind the dev console if you want, and there's also an option to replay your death by pressing R. Furthermore, you can spectate all of your teammates at any point throughout the match by using these teammate cams, which are bound to your F keys by default. For example, this test dummy is teammate number 1, and if I hold F1, I'll be able to switch to his point of view and be able to look around and see what this character is up to. It's rare that you ever need to use this feature, but it is good to know about. The last section to discuss before we move on to some special launch options is the communication section. And this has a new feature here where you get to change the permissions for who you actually get to see communications from. So if you want to see what your allies are pinging, for example, the mid boss or the urn, but you don't want to see any text or voice communications from them, then you can turn those off if you want, which will allow you to communicate essential things with your team without having to see any potential toxicity. So if toxicity is a concern for you, then I would highly recommend checking out this section here. This is also where you can edit the chat wheel to customize which voice lines your character is able to use. And this is what my chat wheel looks like. You'll notice that I don't use the contextual slot 5, and that is because it appears to be really buggy right now. This is supposed to allow you to ping various different things. For example, if you're going back to base, then you can ping be right back. If someone says, hey, let's do the rejuve or let's do the urn, you can quickly ping yes or something like that. But it just doesn't really seem to work or respond with what you want. And sometimes I've noticed it'll even try to respond to some random pings that the enemies are giving, which is not helpful in the slightest. Maybe it'll be fixed in the future, but for now, just don't use this slot. There's also a unique feature in Deadlock where you can passive or aggressive ping on the map. So if you ping, for example, the yellow walker once, it'll give you the passive ping, headed to yellow. If you ping it twice in quick succession, it'll do the aggressive ping, where yellow needs help. This is a very cool feature, but if you wanted to invert this, so you only need to tap once for the aggressive ping and then twice for the passive ping, you can do that with the invert ping button here. And if we head on over to the Keybinds section and scroll down to communication, we can add even more voice lines through the quick ping system. So if you have even more keybinds lying around on your keyboard, you can, for example, create a need healing button. So I can bind this to my tilde and then set it down here to need healing. But you'll notice that this has a viscous icon next to it, and that's because you can actually create custom quick pings for each character. So if you want every character to be able to use your quick pings, then make sure you come up here and select the default character first, and then scroll down here and make your need healing button. And now, you can be toxic on viscous. Yay! I'm just kidding, don't be toxic. The last section of this video is going to discuss some very helpful launch options that you can use to improve how your game looks. For example, you can get these bespoke and fabulous looking health bars, and you can also turn off player, trooper, and boss outlines if you want. Now, you don't need to worry about getting in trouble for using these launch options. You won't get banned or anything like that. The devs added these launch options to allow you to have even more control over how your game looks, and if they didn't want you to use them, then they would just disable them. All of these commands will be in the description down below in order of appearance. The first command will allow you to use these experimental health bars that Valve has been working on over the past year or so. So if you prefer how these look to the normal health bars, then this is the command you'll want to use. But how exactly do you activate it? Well, you just need to close your game and click on the settings icon over here, and then click on properties, and boom! Here's the launch options console ready for you to type in any command you want. And then it's just as simple as copying and pasting the command exactly how it's written, and you're done. The next time you launch your game, you will have these new health bars. You don't even need to press enter. And if you want to add additional commands, all you need to do is copy the next command that you want, press space, and then paste the command so it looks something like this. So you don't need to worry about being limited to just one launch option. You can have multiple. And if you've done everything correctly, then congratulations, you now have Deadlock's new experimental health bars. They look awesome. Now, if you want to remove the red outline that enemy players have, you can do that with this command here. However, I will say that it's a little finicky, and in some matches it just randomly stops working, which is unfortunate, and I hope that they fix this consistency issue in the future, but most of the time it does work, and I think it just makes the game look cleaner. And if you want to remove the outline around the troopers, then you can do that with this command, and this one thankfully has no issues whatsoever. The last command is a little weird. It has to do with the outline around objectives, but it only works for some objectives and not others. And you can actually test all of these commands for yourself by pasting them into the console here. You just have to remove the plus sign at the very front of the command. So delete that and then press enter, and you can see that the outline around this walker has disappeared. However, the outline around the Guardian is still intact. Yeah, that is one red Guardian over there. So personally, I keep the outlines on all objectives enabled because I don't like this inconsistency. And again, hopefully they fix this in the future. But anyways, that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you found it to be helpful, and if you did, of course make sure to drop a like and subscribe down below so you don't miss out on future guides from me. And also while you're down there, leave a comment if you have any additional advice for how you can fine-tune your settings in Deadlock, just in case there's anything that I've missed. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.